Hello, so we are talking about monochromatic shape compositions, and this is the first of two parts of an introduction to color theory. Color theory is a really large field of study that you could spend forever learning about, so this is really just an introduction. So what is color? The basics of color is light. Without light think of a dark room, we can't see anything, we can't see color. So what we see when we see color is really reflected rays of light. So if you think of a red apple, it's absorbing all the color rays except the red. The red rays are bouncing off the red apple, and that's what we're seeing. And then if you think of if you're wearing a black shirt on a hot day, black is absorbing every color. So that's why it makes you feel hotter. All right, the color wheel is our basic color theory diagram, right? How we think about color and how we organize it. So the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And these colors cannot be made by mixing other colors together. That's why they're called the primary colors. Then the secondary colors, and this is when we're talking about mixing paint. The secondary colors are orange, green, and violet, or purple. And these colors are made by combining two primary colors, right? Blue and yellow make green, red and blue make violet and purple. So then the tertiary colors, also in this chart, is called intermediate colors, is by mixing a primary color with the secondary color next to it. So you can see yellow and orange make yellow-orange. So just think about how that works and how that's going to help you mix your paints up. So here are some definitions. So you just start to understand what we're talking about when we talk about color theory, or if you see them out in the world. So hue is just the actual color, red, yellow, blue. So I use hue and color kind of interchangeably. And then saturation is the intensity of color. So if you add white to a color, which creates a tint, if you add black to a color, which creates a shade, it reduces its saturation. So making a color transparent, sort of more see-through, also lowers the saturation level. If you think of a color image, and then if you took away all the color, it would be black and white, and that's completely desaturating it. So value is the degree of lightness or darkness in a color, how light or dark it is. And then tints, like we just talked about, is a lighter color than the hue. So it's the hue but lighter. So pink is a tint of red. And then shades are colors darker than its hue. And maroon is the shade of red. So these are some, well-known color harmonies that artists, designers, interior designers use all the time, and it just looks good, right? That's why they're called color harmonies. Like a musical harmony sounds good. Color harmonies look great together. So monochromatic, what we'll be doing for our project, is the same hue with different levels of saturation and value. Complementary are two hues across each other on the color wheel. This adds some really good contrast in artwork, and that's because it makes the hue look more vivid. So, red and green are complementary colors, and they really make each other pop out. Also, like a lot of complementary colors are colors for sports teams, blue and orange is a really popular one because they're super intense. And also mixing a color with its complementary is a good way to make a shade, a darker value of it without adding black. So that's a good hint about complementary colors. It's a good way to make a shadow color. And then analogous colors are colors next to each other on the color wheel, usually about 3 or 4. And that's often used for interior design. I see analogous colors a lot. Then we have warm and cool. So warms are all red, yellows, oranges, and then the cool side of the color wheel is the blues, purples, and greens. So you can kind of cut the color wheel in half and see it that way. So why are we doing monochromatic? Why are we doing just one color? Because color mixing can be really difficult and complex, and I want to simplify this learning experience for you and just really focus on one color so you can learn how to create values with that color. You can learn about the tints and shades and how it works before moving on to adding other colors and complicating things. I also want you to experiment with the saturation levels, with the tints and shades and transparencies, because a shade of yellow is very different than a shade of red. And learning how those values work with each other takes some time. So I also want to slowly build on skills each week and for you to remember those lessons of the value scale before adding a ton of color. So remember with your value scale that darker hues are going to push back in space and lighter, tints are going to pop forward in space. Okay, so let's look at some artists who did monochromatic work or with very few colors. This is Robert Mangold, and on the left is some studies that he created before making this finished piece. It's an acrylic paint and colored pencil. And I really love seeing how an artist works through their compositions. This is a super simple composition, breaking it down into the most simple shapes of, rectangles and triangles, and really using just one color and then the color of the pencil. But I like seeing how this artist tries a lot of different things on a small scale and then makes it larger. This is Helen Ludenberg, and this is called Silent Interior. It's an oil painting on canvas, and we see very simple shapes and pretty much monochromatic. We have a big value scale here from the light blue on the top right to that very dark color on the left. And I think when you first look at this, it looks completely abstract. But then once I read the title, Silent Interior, I can start to see that, oh yeah, maybe that's a wall or a hallway or something's happening here. And it has a very peaceful, calming with these blues and greens in it. Here's another one by the same artist, a monochromatic painting in green. And similar to the one before, until I read the title, I didn't really see what was happening in this painting. But then once I read the title, it all sort of started to make sense. It's called Road in Shadow. And we can see a horizon line in the back with maybe some soft, the darkest part is the hills. And then there's a road moving towards us. I think this is another really calming, interesting monochromatic painting that is based in reality, but is also just the simple shapes of the composition that make a strong composition. And there's a range of values here that is making it interesting. I know this isn't totally abstract, but it's monochromatic. And I want to bring you back to those principles of design and think about pattern and repetition and how you might add some more principles of design into your composition. So I don't want you to be forgetting about that. This is Richard Yard, and this is from 2000. It's watercolor. And this is from the Worcester Art Museum. And you can get a link, see the link to it if you want to learn more. But this is called Ring Shout, and it takes its name and inspiration from a religious ceremony and healing ritual performed by African Americans during the slave era. And Richard Yard he's not alive anymore, was an African American artist, and using this history that maybe not everyone would know about this ceremony or this ritual, but creating this work of art that I think anyone could look at and see it's a successful work of art, and then learning the meaning behind it, we get deeper and deeper into it. This artist is making a monochromatic image and simplifying the hues. We're really only in blues here, and they're light and dark. that's allowing us to move into this more complex meaning behind the painting. It's giving us a way in. Also, blue has a lot of meaning behind it. You know, it is calming, but it's also sad. And I think of blues music and sorrow. And so I think that is adding meaning. And I think this painting like unfolds in layers of meaning and beauty as we look into it, and sorrow and everything that's wrapped up into the history of this. And then I think also simplifying it not only with the colors, but with that pattern. There's a pattern in the background of the square shapes, and then there's the repetition of the shoes and the handprints. I think that's also bringing us into the simplicity of it, and then this complex meaning can kind of envelop us as we move into the painting. That's how it works in my mind. So I kind of like to explain how I think of art and how it moves me. And of course, your experience could be totally different, and everyone would have a different experience. And seeing it in person obviously is going to be completely different as well. All right. We're also going to work on edges in this project. So remember when we talked about unifying and contrasting things in previous projects, the edges are another way to unify and contrast different elements in your compositions. So the edges are just what is between the shapes, how shapes meet each other, and also how shapes connect to the background. So the edge between two shapes, or the edge between a shape and the background. And a sharp edge, something that's really defined, creates more contrast between colors and values, where a soft edge can be blended, and that can help to unify. So again, I'm trying to simplify these maybe more difficult to understand art concepts, because I think sometimes in the art world, language can get really pretentious and can get overdone, and people have a lot of ego behind it, right? But if we're really just talking about sharp edges, soft edges, blending, creating contrast is making things look different from each other, and that's going to make certain things pop out. Unifying things are tying them together, blending them together, and that's going to make them work together. And I think a combination of this contrast and unity and different kind of edges in a painting can make a composition really successful, or you can choose just contrasting edges or unifying edges. Like this painting by Gerald Murphy is very sharp edges. There's no soft edges in here. It's really a lot of shapes. It's very simple colors. It's actually complementary colors, right? We have the yellow, orange, and blue next to each other. And so the yellow is really popping out, with the blue serving as more of a background. And there is no soft edge here. Everything is really clean, precise, and sharp, and it creates a certain kind of image. Now, this is to contrast with this Morton Schamberg painting that has completely soft edges, where some of the edges in these there's two circles, some of the edges are completely obliterated, and we see a lot of unity between the background and the shapes. So they're completely softened, and the background is bleeding and blending into the shape. And likewise, the shape is blending into the background. This is Lee Krasner. This is an example of rough edges, right? I see them as really rough and textured. So part of the shapes are really crisp and clean, right? We have really clear shapes, but then the edges are so textured that it is starting to soften into the background a little bit, or blur into the background a little bit, but it's a real contrast between the white background and the black outline of the shapes. So I think the edges in this painting are really interesting because they're doing a lot of different things. They're soft and sharp, and there's a lot of contrast, but then there's unity too with the sort of softness and texture in the background texture and in the black outline of the shape. So I think the more I look at this painting, and specifically looking at how she dealt with the edges, I think the more interesting it gets to me. This is Sonia Delany Turk. She was a Russian, I think born in Russia or Ukraine, and then moved to France. So this has, different than the Krasner painting, this painting has really interesting edges as well. There's a mixture of soft and sharp edges, and we see things blending into each other, and then areas where it's a very, very distinct sharp edge. So I think this is a nice example of using different kind of edges together to blend shapes in and then create some more definition. Okay, this, you might have seen these paintings before by Mark Rothko. He was born in Latvia, which was part of Russia, I think at the time he was born, and then he came to the US. And this is from 1959. So these were called color field paintings, where large flat areas of color are supposed to create a transcendent contemplative mood. He actually had a whole chapel created with his works, and the light was dimmed and there was comfortable seats, and he wanted you to really see his work in a specific setting, not in a museum that's crowded where you're standing up and the lights are really bright. He wanted to create this whole contemplative mood. This is really a good example also of that figure ground relationship that we talked about in previous projects, where the figure is the lighter shade of purple that is floating on a color ground. So the background is darker and pushing back, and then the lighter value is the lighter shape is popping forward and looks like it's floating. So I know these paintings seem really simple at first, but when you start to think about, if you want to learn more about Mark Rothko's life and how he wanted his paintings to be viewed, they become more and more interesting. We see them printed on posters or around, they get reproduced a lot. And then I think when you start to, so they can just look normal or everyday to us, but I want you to start looking deeper at the meaning behind these, and think about what the artist was thinking about when they were creating them. And then also the edges on this are very brushy, right? They're not solid, sharp edges. They're bleeding into the background, and the colors are bleeding into each other, and they're kind of fuzzy. So that is also giving this sense of contemplation, this sense of calm and quiet. These paintings make me feel very calm. Okay, so for your warm-up, you're going to get ready for your project by creating a monochromatic value scale of tints and shades. You're going to choose one hue or color for your painting, and you're going to create one column that is of shades, adding black to that hue, and one of tints, adding white to that hue. And you're going to make at least 7 different shades and 7 different tints, and that includes the pure hue color, the color right out of the tube. And you can pick whatever color you want. And then for your project, you're going to create a new abstract shape composition, but using as a reference the shape composition you made from last week. So that's going to be like your reference image, but you're going to create a new monochromatic painting, but using the shapes and the composition you created last week. You can make updates and changes to it, and the color or hue that you choose for the monochromatic stuff is your choice. I want you to paint a range of values and saturation levels. So that means using tints, shades, and transparency. That's where we're going to make the value scale. So you have that already set up, and you can refer to it to make sure you're getting all your values in. And then I also want you to work on your edges in this composition. So, soft edges to unify and sharp edges to contrast. So thinking about how your shapes work with the background and work with other shapes, how they meet, how they blend together, or how they contrast each other. And then I also want you to think about skills from previous weeks, the principles of design, the figure-ground relationship, all of that stuff that we've been learning to create this new painting that you can make updates to. All right, let's move on to the warm-up demo for your value scale, and then the demonstration for the project will be in another video. Okay, so we're gonna start with the monochromatic value scale, and I'm actually doing mine on the piece of paper that I'm gonna do my painting on. So I've made the outline of my composition here, which is 8 by 8. You can make yours any size that you want to. And then I have a column for tints and a column for shades just right next to my painting. You can do it on a separate piece of paper, but this is a common thing that artists will do. You don't have to write this all out. I'm just writing it out for you. And I'm doing the 7 different values here. And a lot of artists will do this on the side of their paper or canvas just to have it all set up, to have it all worked out. So I have my paint set up here, and I'm going to do blue for my monochromatic painting. So what you do your value scale in should be the color you're going to choose to do your project in, your painting in. So I'm actually going to put a little bit of blue on 2 different wells in my palette, one for the tints and one for the shades. And again, I'm just squeezing out a little bit so I don't waste any. And then I have white that I'll put in another palette well, and black. So I'm gonna start with the tints, which is the white. And remember, with mixing with white, you just wanna add a little bit of the color to the white. So I'm gonna start with actually the lightest one and then get darker. I'm gonna use this flatter brush. And you can make, squares here or however it works for you. I'm just gonna get my brush a little bit wet, and I wanna start with the pure color here out of the tube and then get lighter as I go down. So this number 7 will be my lightest. And if that doesn't make sense for you, you can do yours differently. This is really for you. So I'm just taking a very tiny bit of blue and adding it to this white. And I'll just that maybe had too much water in it. So I'm just wiping it off, my brush off on this rag, taking a little more blue. And a little more white so I want to have a solid color down there. Probably didn't need to add any water. Now I'm gonna take some more blue and add it here. The white is running out. See, the white gets used up pretty quick. And I want to just get a little bit darker than that. And then keep adding more blue, and you probably have to add more white too, because it's going to get all taken up. And that looks really close, which is fine. Remember, we can paint right over it, so I'm going to add a little more blue here. And this is how we keep working to get darker and darker. So you should see a little bit of a change in between each. So I'm just taking a little blue. That looks pretty much the same. So make it a little darker. You know what, I picked up some black that I'm not always the best at cleaning out my palette. So I picked up some black that was on my palette, and I'm going to wash and dry my brush a little bit. And since my brush is clean and you can do this just if you want to see. I'm going to take the pure blue, and that will be number 1. So that's the pure blue right out of the tube, and I can do it over here for the shades too. Just add a little bit to here. That's not going to be dark enough. I think we need to get a little darker there. So these are pretty close together. So I'm going to get a little bit lighter, create a little bit more difference. So I just want you to get a range of colors down, a range of values from dark to light down here so you can see all your options. And you can keep adjusting. That is good enough. All right, now clean your brush, and we're gonna start with the shades. So it'll be the darkest down here. You could also do it, now that I'm looking at it, you know, there's a million ways to do everything. So since this is the darkest tint value, you could also make the darkest up here, but I'm gonna do it down here just to show the contrast. And just because I'm gonna mix it the same with having the most black at the bottom at number 7. But I guess I'm trying to give you all these options because this is your artwork. You can make it however makes sense to you. Some people would probably change their water out at this time, but I'm not going to. So we have the blue. I'm just gonna add a little bit of black to it. Black is really powerful. So we're gonna need more blue here. I can even take it, so I had it on my brush mixed, and I can take it over here and mix it. So I had this black mixed with the blue that looked a little too dark to me. So I took that and brought it back into the blue out of the tube. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's just a little darker. And now I'm gonna add just a touch, just take a little touch of it. Get darker. And then the same thing, you just keep adding. Whoops, see how I got too much on my brush, which is okay. But that might be somewhere down here because that's almost black. And let's see if I need to squeeze it out. Sometimes I don't like to waste stuff, so well, that's too dark. Let me get more blue. I'm gonna put it in a new paint well. This is good. I like when things like this happen when I'm doing demonstrations because you can see, because it's going to happen to you too. So now I'm taking it over here. What's that look like? Ah, that's better. That's actually a really nice color. This blue is a cyan, if you do digital art, you know from printing, it's like CMYK. So gouache was used by designers before digital art. So cyan was a color used in the printing world, and so you would have painted with cyan. Anyway, it's if you're into digital art, it's definitely cool to think about how painting relates to it and how gouache can help you in that world. Okay, I think these are looking pretty good. These three are all really similar. So I'm gonna see, maybe I can lighten that one up a little bit. Yeah, that's better. And then I wanna get my darkest black here, like a blue black, which is actually a color that they sell, a paint color. And that looks almost too black, but let me see if I can lighten it a little bit. And you see how I'm moving into different paint wells. to try to help this color lighten up. You can always clean your brush if you got into trouble there. All right, let me take some blue, pick it up with this. I'm gonna say that's okay. We can, sometimes on the edge I'll show a little bit of the blue coming out, but you can go all the way to black. The reason I didn't go all the way to white is because you can't see it on the paper. So that does have some blue in it, even though it's really hard to see. And this is also just important to get you learning how to mix. All right, so now I have my tints and shades on my value scale. My paper's ready to move on to the final painting, which that demonstration will be in another video. I would advise you, if you're gonna start, to get some clean water.